Hi, I'm Vicky from So Fabulous Fabrics. Today we are going to make a new patchwork project. It is called Tropical Paradise Table Topper, and here it is. So this project comprises of 4 blocks. They are all the same pattern for each block, but I have chosen to make one of the blocks, which is this top one here, using all 4 fabrics, and then the other 3 have all got the same background and then a different focal fabric. I've then stitched it together with some quilting, and I've put binding around the edge. So that's what we are going to be making today. Here are the tools that I'll be using through this video to make our project. So first of all, I have a tailor's clapper, which is great for pressing down on your seams to get them flat. I've got some paper scissors and some fabric scissors. I've got a marking pen. This is the friction one, which disappears when you put the iron on it. My trusty seam ripper, my seam roller or seam press. I've got some clips, pin cushion, rotary cutter, and I have 2 rulers. So I have my oblong one, and I've also got, for this project, a square one. This square one has got a marking on it from corner to corner, which is a 45-degree angle, which will come in very handy when we are doing our half square triangles. There are a lot of them in this project, so if you have got a square ruler with, or a ruler with a 45-degree angle on, then I would suggest that's what you use. Now, if you've got a square ruler that hasn't got the angle marked on it, which I have just here, this was a freebie ruler from today's quilter, and it's got inches and centimetres on it. But what I've done, because it hasn't actually got a marking on it, I've put some tape on there, some washi tape, so it's easier to get off, so as I have got a mark where the 45-degree line is. So you could do that as well. In front of me I have my sheet of templates. I've printed mine out on card so I can reuse them throughout the project. You've got 4 of the curved shape of the orange peel block and 4 of the, some people call it a petal, call it an oval shape, whatever you want to call it, but you've also got 4 of those. I'm just going to cut out 1 of each, and I'll use those to begin with, but obviously there's spares there, so you can cut out more as you go along. They've all got a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the shape as well. Now you will notice on this one just here, I have drawn some extra lines. Because these pieces for the orange peel block are quite small when you're sewing them together, I'm allowing myself an extra 1/4 inch on the 2 straight sides. So what I've done is I have just measured a 1/4 inch from the dotted line just here, and then I've drawn a new line down and across the top. Obviously you need another 1/4 inch from this point downwards, and then you will turn the rule around and you'll do exactly the same on the other side. So I'm just going to cut out 1 of those for now, and then we'll have a look at the fabrics. These are the fabrics I will be using for the project I'm making today. They are all from Art Gallery Fabrics, and the range is called Soul Fusion. So I'm going to be using this one as my background throughout, and then I have these other three as the accents for the block. So let's make a start. These are the two templates that I've cut out that I've used for cutting around for the fabric pieces, and you can see on this one where this would normally be the cutting line, the little dotted line, but as I explained at the beginning, I've extended both these straight lines by 1/4 of an inch. It's just going to enable me a little bit more leeway when I'm sewing these pieces together. It's a little bit fiddly, so if you've got larger pieces, it's then going to be easier for you to trim it down to the correct size before you sew them all together. So that's the two templates, and what you're looking for is to have one of this one and two of this one. So going through the fabrics, we've got fabric A. So I have already cut out template A, which was this one. As you can see, that's the size of the piece of fabric. So I have 32 of those. This is for the background, this particular fabric. And then I've got A1, A2 and A3, and then fabric B, you've got 4 of template B, which is the petal shape or leaf shape, whatever you want to call it. And then I have got B1 and B2. Then for fabric C, I have got, again, template B, the petal shape, I've got 8 of that one. And then I've got C1 and C2. And then fabric D, I have got 4 of template B, D1, D2 and D3. So we're now going to get ready for our first block. Now, for this block, I have 2 of fabric A1, 4 of A3, 8 of our orange peel template A. I've got 24 of B2, 4 of C2 and 4 of template B, 2 of D1 and 4 of D2. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to make the half square triangles. So for that you're going to need A1 and D1, and we're going to be making 16 altogether. So taking one of your background fabrics and one of your main fabrics, on the back of one of them you want to draw some diagonal lines, so we're going to draw 2. So corner to corner, place the 2 pieces right sides together, and then I'm just going to put a couple of pins in just to keep it steady while I transfer it over to the sewing machine. And then I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch on either side of these drawn lines. And I'm going to do exactly the same with the other two fabrics. There are my two squares stitched together. So you should have 4 diagonal lines stitched on each piece. We're now ready to cut them into the half square triangles. So I've got my rotating cutting mat, rotary cutter and my ruler. I'm going to start by cutting on the vertical and the horizontal. So find the middle of your fabric. So you can use the straight edges on your ruler as well, just to make it more accurate, and find the middle of where the stitching meets. And then I'm going to move that around. Do the other side. And then we are going to cut across the diagonal between the 2 sets of stitch lines. And there you will have 8 half square triangles. I'm going to flatten mine out with my little seam press. So you could use your iron if you wanted to, but I think this is just as easy. So I'm going to do all 8 of these ones, and then I'm going to cut the other square set into a further 8 half square triangles. To trim your half square triangles to the size that the pattern states, you're going to need your rotary cutter and a ruler that has a 45-degree angle on it. So I've got this square ruler, and what you need to do first of all is you just need to measure the size that the half square triangle has come out at. Place the line that's the 45-degree line on the center of your square where the 2 fabrics are sewn together, and then you can just measure how big your square is, and then just move your ruler downwards so the 45-degree angle is still on this center line. And what we're going to do is we're going to trim a piece from the right hand side and the top, and then we're going to twizzle it round, and we're going to do the same on the other 2 sides. So I have measured my piece, and I've divided the amount of fabric that is the extra piece in half, so I know how much I need to cut off all around, because you want to try and make it as even as possible. So with mine it's not very much, so just pulling my ruler down, keeping, as I say, keeping that 45-degree line on the center of your square. Then just trim the edges off. move that round and do exactly the same thing. So again, 45-degree angle on that centerpiece, just measure, move it down so you keep that line in the center, find the size that it's going to be finished, and then trim your pieces off. And there you have your half square triangle. So I've done most of mine, I've just got one more left to do. Let's have a look at some alternative ways to stitch your orange peel blocks for this project. So in front of me, I have got some pieces of fabric and some interfacing ready just to show you some samples. I've got squares of background fabric, which are cut to the size that the pattern says. I've got some interfacing pieces and my fabrics, but we'll run through each method separately. So I'm just going to take one of these and one interfacing, one main fabric, move those out of the way. Now you can see here that I have got my template for this one. This template is going to be used a bit later on for a different method, and that, as you can see, is the inner part of the petal. So I've just cut the seam allowance away from that center part. So I have drawn around my petal shape, which I have just here. If you are using this method to make your petals, I would suggest you used a firm fusible interfacing. The first one that I tried to do, I was using a medium weight, and it just tore when I was trying to turn it inside out, or the right way around, should I say. So I would suggest using a firm fusible interfacing, and then you'll get a much better finish as well when you turn your piece the right way round. So for this one, what you want to do with your interfacing is you want to place it on top of the right side of your fabric, but with the bobbly side, so that's the fusible side, on top, which is a little bit alien, but you'll see why once we've stitched it together. And then you're going to stitch your 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way round, so you're securing both pieces together. I've stitched my interfacing onto the right side of my fabric. So just a reminder that you're stitching it so the fusible side of your interfacing is attached to the right side of your fabric piece, and it's stitched all the way around without any openings. Now, first of all, I'm going to trim the edges. You will find that it'll be a little bit easier to turn and to push out into shape. Don't trim it too close to your stitching line, because you could end up developing holes when you're turning it the right way round. So I'm just going to trim a little bit off all the way around. When I get to the pointed end, I'm just going to snip a piece off straight, just cut that corner off, and then continue just to trim. Now, depending on what you prefer to use to cut into the interfacing, you could either use your seam ripper, or if you've got a small pair of scissors with a good pointed end, I'm going to use my seam ripper. Now, with this method, you need to be very careful that you don't cut into your fabric. So very carefully pop your seam ripper or scissors in to your interfacing. Just check on the other side that you haven't pushed all the way through and made a hole. And then just cut a gap into your interfacing. And then what we're going to do, we're going to turn it the right way round. So this is a little bit fiddly because they are small pieces. And if you need to cut your gap a little bit wider, then do that. Just be very careful of where the stitching is and you don't cut into the stitching. And we're just going to turn it the right way round. Whatever you do before you've done this, which I haven't mentioned, is don't be tempted to iron it before you turn it round the right way, because you will then iron your interfacing onto your fabric, which means then you won't be able to turn it round the right way. That's not something that I have done, I can be honest about that, but you know, you do need to be a bit careful. So if you've got a point turner, then use that to very gently push your points out at either end. Don't be too fierce with it or too hard with it, because you don't want to make a hole in either the fabric or the interfacing. So just very gently push those points out. If you've got some tweezers as well, that might help to pull the interfacing and the fabric out of those points. So very, very carefully. So I think I could probably pull a little bit more out of there with the tweezers, but for this demonstration I'm not going to worry about it too much. I like to get my point turner just under the fabric seam, so not on the interfacing side, because you could push a hole into the interfacing, but just under where the stitching line is on the in the seam of the fabric. So you can just run that around, just very carefully pushing your fabric into shape. Again, that point would need a little bit of manipulation, but I'm not going to worry about it at the moment. So just get your point, or you could use your curved end. These are quite small pieces to try and get the curved end in bit in, but you can do that as well. And just carefully try and get your leaf shape. Okay, that's not looking too bad. Next, we're going to be ironing it onto our square. So first of all, we need to find the center point on the diagonal. So let's just fold that. So I'm folding the fabric Yeah, folding the fabric wrong sides together to get that diagonal crease in the middle there. And I'm going to do the same with my leaf shape. So again, fold wrong sides together. And then you've got your crease, which hopefully you can match in the middle. What you can also do is fold it in half again. I mean, if you wanted to draw some lines on with your disappearing pen, then obviously you could do that also, just to help. And I'm going to put another diagonal crease in the square. And then the hope is that when you lay it on top of your fabric, you can match your line going this way and the middle of your leaf shape along that other center diagonal. And then when you're happy with it in the place you want it to be, either pop some pins in it or very carefully place it onto your pressing mat, and you're then going to press it down onto this square. So that is the reason why we have got the interfacing. So it's the fusible side is on the outside of the leaf, because then that will enable us to iron it onto your square. So I will go and do that, and then we'll take a look at that when it's done. There is my first sample. I'm hoping you can see that okay. So I have done a running stitch on one side. So this is the applique piece with the interfacing on the back that's been ironed on to the background square. And I've also, just as a sample, I've stitched, which I know you can't see very well, I'm going to turn it over in a moment. I've also stitched a blanket stitch on this side, just so as you can see. You could use any decorative stitch you wanted, or you could just use a straightforward straight stitch. So there on the back, you can see where the decorative blanket stitch is and the running stitch. So that's one example of stitching your applique pieces onto your background square. The next sample I have is going to be hand stitched on. So I have prepared it in exactly the same way as the first one with the interfacing, and I've ironed it onto the background fabric. And I am just using a slip stitch to hand stitch it on. So you can just see the tiny little stitches on the back, which aren't going to be seen, just to stitch this one on. Again, if you want to hand stitch using a decorative stitch, you can do. I have a book actually with lots of decorative stitches in it, but good old Google will give you some ideas as well. So if you like to do a little bit of hand stitching, then that's a good way to finish them off. My third example is raw edge applique. So for this one, I've used just the centre of the petal shape, so I cut the seam allowance off it before cutting out the piece of fabric. So you can see that that's that size. And I'm going to pin it on to the background fabric, and then I'm just going to stitch like raw edge applique around it. So I will prepare it exactly the same as I've done with the other two by folding the fabrics in half to find the centre on the diagonal, and then I will stitch it on and we'll have a look. There is my third sample, and that is raw edge applique. So I have just stitched it straight down onto the background fabric without turning the fabric under at all. And that's what it looks like on the reverse. We're now going to do the orange peel blocks. So you will need one of template B and two, sorry, of template A. Just move those over there. And I'm going to use pins to pin my pieces together. I do find that a little bit easier. First of all, you'll need to fold your fabrics in half to find the centre point. So with the orange one, I'm going to fold right sides together, two edges, and then just put a finger crease in the top part there. And then for the brown one, I'm going to fold it in half so it's wrong sides together, and again just put a finger crease in the top. If you want to put a little pen mark, if you've got a friction pen which disappears when it's ironed, then you could use that as well. So just put a little mark at the top of the crease, and I'm going to put a little mark at the bottom of the crease on the petal one as well, so I can get it in the right position on this piece here. So right sides together, find your two marks and place your petal piece on top, and then making sure that if you've marked it or where the crease is in line with the corner at the bottom here. I'm just going to pop a pin in there. And then I'm going to turn it over. So taking this loose piece here, I'm going to place that on the bottom curve of the petal piece, getting the two top edges together. And pop a pin in there. And then do exactly the same on the other side. Because the two fabrics are cut on the bias of the fabric, this piece here should be quite easy to manipulate around the curve of your petal piece. So you can just pull it slightly, just manoeuvring it with your fingers, and you can see that the two pieces will sit together on that curve. Now I'm just going to pop one pin in either side of the middle pin. If you want to pin it all the way along, if you feel that will be a bit more secure for you, then do that. When I've put it under the needle of the sewing machine, I will then manipulate it a bit more as I'm sewing. So I'll just pop that one in there. Okay, so I'm now going to go to the sewing machine and stitch a scant 1/4 inch around that curve, and then we'll come back and I'll flatten it out and we can just take a look before we sew the other half on. I've stitched my first piece on, so there we go, and I'm just going to give it a little press before I stitch the other side on. Now when you're pressing these, because it's cut on the bias, you just need to be quite careful because you can distort it quite easily. Now part of the reason why we made these pieces slightly bigger than the pattern is so as we can trim them down. So if it does get slightly distorted, it's not going to matter too much because you're going to square it up at the end anyway. So what I'm going to do, if you wanted to, and you've got some starch, you could put some starch on here as well. Now I'm pressing my seam to this outer edge, and I'm just going to literally just pop the iron on top. I'm not going to move it, I'm just going to pop it on top and do the other edge. And then I'm just going to turn it over and again just lay the iron on top just to get the heat in, but without moving it. Then hopefully it will stay as square as it can be. So now I've done that, I'm now ready to stitch the other piece on the other side. Before we do that, we're going to trim the 2 straight edges of the first piece that we've made. So using your ruler and your rotary cutter, what we're going to do is we're going to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance from this edge here outwards, and then we're just going to trim off the excess. So find the 1/4 inch on your ruler, and using the other edge as a guide, you can see it's a little bit crooked there, but it's you've got 2 points there where the straight line would be. So I've got my 1/4 inch mark at the bottom of the curve, and I shall just trim that piece off. And then we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. So now you've got a straight line trimmed on the bottom of here that you can place your ruler on, and again just get your 1/4 inch mark at the top here, and we will trim that edge off. So now we're going to stitch this piece on to the opposite side. So again, just fold your pieces in half just to get that mark at the top, and again you could just put a bit of pen mark on there as well. And then with this piece, again fold in half so as it's right sides together, find the center, and I've already put a mark in there, and you could also put a mark at the bottom as well if you just want to make sure you've got it in the right place. So right sides together, pop a pin in the top there, and then this piece here is going to go along this piece here at the top, so we'll just move that round, so the 2 straight edges this time, will be matching. I'll put a pin in. Exactly the same on the other side. And then just manipulate the fabric to move it into place around the curves. And then you're ready to stitch those two pieces together. There we have the 4 orange peel little blocks finished, and they will be sewn together as a set of 4 for the centre of our block. We're now going to move on to the diamonds in a square. So for this one you will need your 4 pieces of D2 and your 24 pieces of B2. So what we're going to do first of all is I'm just going to take 4 of these and I'm going to draw a line diagonally across each of them. We will be using 16 of this square with the daisies on, because we'll be placing 4 on each one of these pieces of fabric here, and then the rest will be used elsewhere on the block. So we have one of the squares and one of the little squares that we've just drawn a line on, and that is going to go in the top left hand corner, and I'm going to stitch just slightly off the line, so not exactly on the line, because you will find that the stitching takes up some of the room, so when you actually fold it back and press it, it won't meet this edge here. So I'm just going to stitch it just slightly off that line on the side of where it's going to be folded over. So I'm going to do that with the first one, and then we'll come back and have a look, and then we can carry on with the rest of them. Hopefully you can see where I've stitched just to the left of that line just there, the line that we drew. So we're now going to fold that over, and you can either finger press it or use your seam roller. And then we're going to trim to a 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to trim the 2 bottom fabrics away, so that just saves some of the bulk. Just fold that back again. And then we will take the next one that we have with the drawn line on it, and that one will go on the opposite corner, and I will do exactly the same, stitch it down, fold it back, trim the 2 bits off at the bottom, and then I'll complete the other 2 on the other corners. So I'll get those done, and then we'll come back and look at the first one completed. There is the first one complete, so I'm going to carry on and do the other 3. When you come to stitch all the pieces together for your block, you'll need to decide which way you want your stripes to go. You might want to alternate them or have them all going the same way. I think I'm going to have mine facing downwards, or vertical, should we say, for all 4 of my diamond in a square. So I'm going to complete the other 3, and then I think we're ready then to start assembling our block. Once you have finished your 4 diamonds in a square, then I would just measure them and make sure that they are at the size that they should be according to the pattern. I can see that some of mine are a little bit distorted, so I'm just going to check the sizes of them and just trim the edges if necessary. I'm now ready to put the block together. So I have got my fabric C2, A3, I've got my 16 half square triangles, my 4 diamond in a square, and my 4 orange peel blocks. I'm going to start by stitching these 4 blocks together, and then I shall move on to doing the top row. I have stitched my orange peel blocks in 2 pairs, and I have pressed the seams open on the back just to make it a bit flatter for when you're going to stitch the 2 halves together. So I'm going to take a pin, and on the reverse I'm going to pop it through the back where the seams meet, just where the stitching is, where the 2 pieces join, and then I'm going to pop it into the front of the second piece in exactly the same way. Then I shall push the 2 together, just give it a little wiggle to make sure that they are there, hopefully joining in the middle. And I'm just going to put a couple of clips in while I take that to the sewing machine. Then I can adjust it when I'm there. So I will now stitch those 2 pieces together. So there are my 4 pieces stitched together. So I'm just going to press the seam open on the back. It is very bulky, especially in the middle. So I'm going to press it with the iron. Get that centre bit as flat as possible, and then I'm going to pop the tailor's clapper on the top as well. Just push that down hard. If you've got anything else that's heavy you could use, then it's definitely worth doing. Like if you've got some books or something like that that is heavy that you can pop on the top of that, and that will just help it to flatten. So there we go, there's the centre of my block finished. Next I'm going to assemble the 4 corner blocks and the 2 little blocks that are either side of the diamond in a square. So for the corner blocks you're going to need your 4 pieces of C2. So 1 for each corner, and you're going to need 2 of your half square triangles for each corner and 1 of A3. So that's your 4 pieces you're going to need. And I'm going to sew mine in 2 halves. So I'm going to stitch the brown one with the half square triangle for the top, and then the bottom one for the other half, and then I will stitch the two pieces together, and I'm going to make all 4 of those at the same time. I've stitched my 4 pairs together and I've laid them out according to the pattern, so as I can just make sure they're all going together the same way. So that's my 4 pairs, 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom, so these are the corners, and I'm now going to stitch them together. I've also pressed the seams for each pair so as they're in opposite directions, so I can nest the seams together. So just taking 1 pair, pop your 2 seams that you've just stitched together, making sure that these 2 top bits are butted next to each other. And you can either put a pin in there or just pop a clip until you're ready to get to the sewing machine. So I'm going to do all 4 and then I'm going to stitch them together. I've also prepped the other pieces that I need, which are going to be attached to the diamond in a square. So you'll need 1 pair for each diamond in a square, and you're going to need them so as get it round the right way. So we want that one for the left of the diamond in a square and that one for the right. So the 2 striped fabrics are on the opposite sides when they're attached to the square. So I've done all of those as well, and I'm going to also stitch these onto the center piece at the same time. There are all my pieces sewn together and I have pressed them with the iron. So you've got the 3 pieces here for the top row and then 3 pieces for the bottom row. So the brown and purple ones are in the corners, and then these 2 pieces here are for the middle row, which will be fixed onto the orange peel square. So I'm now going to stitch my pieces together. So I'm going to stitch those 3 together, those 3 together, and then those 3 together. So I will do those and then I'm going to stitch them 1, 2, 3 rows, and then that will be the block finished. And there is my first block finished. There are my 4 blocks finished. I'm going to make a wall hanging with mine, and I'm going to place them the following way. So I'm going to put, that's the one with all the fabrics, that's the multi-fabric one at the top, and then the purple one, and then I think I'll put the orange one and the stripy one. Now at the moment it looks quite cluttered because of all the fabrics, so I'm going to put some sashing in between mine. So I have got the 4 fabrics that we have used to make these blocks, and I'm going to audition each one to see which one I like to go in between for the sashing. So this is the one that we used as the background. So I'm just going to lay that flat, and then just find the multi-fabric one. So I'm going to do my sashing. Well, I'm going to cut it as 1-inch strips. So then the finished sashing when it's sewn in will be 1/2 inch. I'll just see, just have to guess a little bit for the the bits in between the blocks going horizontal here. So you could take a photo. Sometimes I take a photo when I'm trying to decide on what looks best, but I quite like that because it's quite neutral and it is the background fabric as well, so it doesn't take it away from the actual blocks themselves. So that one's quite a good choice. We could look at the daisy one. So I'll put them in the same order. I think I can see straight away that this one is going to be a bit too much colour. No, I'm not so keen on that one. So I think I'm going to go back to this one to use as my sashing. So I'm going to cut the pieces that I need to do that. So I will measure and cut 1 inch wide and the length of the block for in between the two sets. And then once I've done those, we will attach the middle piece of sashing in between the two sets. So I will get those done, and then we will be ready to make a quilt sandwich and get it basted and quilted, and then put some binding on. Here are my 4 blocks stitched together, and I've put the sashing in between, as you can see just here. So we're now ready to quilt. I've made a quilt sandwich, so I have my backing fabric and some batting, and then with the finished piece on the top. And I've secured all 3 layers together using these curved quilt pins. So it's now just a case of deciding how you're going to quilt it. I think I'm going to do some quilting in the ditch, but I'll see when I get to the sewing machine. I might change my mind. But once that's finished, it'll then be ready to trim and to put the binding on. We're now going to put the binding on our mini quilt. So first of all, you need to measure all 4 edges of your quilt and add on 10 inches. You'll then need to cut your strips from your chosen fabric. I'm doing mine 2.5 inches wide, and for my mini quilt I'm going to need 70 inches worth of binding. So I've got 2 strips of fabric here on the table because I've cut it off the width of the bolt, and I'm using the bumbleberries. Now on the Rudy the reindeer wall hanging I did before Christmas, I found a new, or a different, should I say, technique of joining your binding pieces together. So I'm going to show you how to do that again today. I thought it was a really good way of doing it, and actually I found it a much more accurate way when I folded the pieces in half to press them. So you're going to need your quilting ruler if you've got one, and you need to find the 45-degree angle which is on your ruler. So this is mine here. So place that line, that 45-degree line, on the edge of your binding fabric. Now I've got 2 pieces together here because I'm going to cut through 2 pieces. And then at the end you need to find where the intersection is for 1/4 inch. So mine is just there, so that's the quarter of an inch square, if you like, just there. And you need to place that point on the bottom edge of your binding. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to trim off that triangle that's on the end there. So there you've got your 2 pieces. And then how it's going to work is taking your 2 ends, you're going to place them, let's get that round the right way, so they are right sides together, and then you have got then your 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew down that edge. So I'm going to do that on the sewing machine using my 1/4 inch foot, and we'll come back and have a look. And I'm going to press it open as well, ready for stitching onto the wall hanging. There are the 2 pieces of binding stitched together, and I've ironed the seam allowance flat. So you can see when you look on the front, you haven't got any of those little tails that you normally have when you're stitching your binding pieces together. And it's nice and even along the edges, which is fantastic. So I have gone along as well and pressed my binding in half all the way. And it's now ready to stitch onto our mini quilt. I'm going to go ahead and stitch my binding on, and then when we get to near the end of it, I'm going to come back and show you how I'm going to finish it off. I'm going to use a slightly different method this time to deal with the ends of the binding than we did on the Rudy wall hanging. You'll need to leave about 5 inches of binding unstitched on both ends, and I've got about a gap of 8 inches unstitched here. So what you'll need to do is lay one piece of your binding down, and I'm just going to pop it off the edge slightly so I can see it when I come to do my bit of measuring. Lay your other piece on top, and then whatever width you've cut your binding fabric, as mine is 2.5 inches, the easiest way to do it is, if you've got a spare piece like I have here, is place that on the edge of where the binding begins. So that's why we've just got that little bit sticking out slightly so we can see it a bit better. So pop that on there, and then using some sort of marker pen or whatever you use to mark your fabric with, just draw a line along that edge there on the right. Now if you draw it along on the left and you cut your fabric off there, you'll find that your binding's not long enough. So make sure you do it to the right of this piece of binding. So you're using the width of this because this is the width of the binding that you've just sewn on. And then you need to snip that piece off. So to attach the 2 pieces of binding together, I'm going to just press, or finger press, this fabric across, which will then form a line across the middle, which I'm going to use as my stitching line when I get to the machine. So I'm just going to finger press that. And then taking your 2 ends of binding, pop them right sides together. This is probably the most difficult part, I think, because the fabric is fighting against each other where it's been stitched on and you want to carry on stitching it. Okay, so I'm just going to pop some pins along that line that I've just pressed a crease. and then I will go and sew that on the machine, and we'll come back and see how it looks. So there is the seam pressed open on the inside, and that fits along there perfectly. So I'm now ready just to finish the stitching all the way along here, and then that's the binding attached. Once I finish that, I'm going to turn it over to the back. Let's have a look at this side. And you could either stitch in the ditch along this line, catching the binding on the reverse, or you could do some hand stitching. I think I'm probably going to do some hand stitching. So once it's all finished, we'll come back and have a look.